A Canadian woman has set her sights on the biggest job at the United Nations. The chair of the Secretary General, Arora Akanksha, is challenging the incumbent, Antonio Guterres, who's seeking a second term, the first time that's ever been done. She's also the youngest person to vie for the job, and should she succeed, she would become the first woman to assume the post. But there are more than a few challenges in her way. Arora Akanksha joins us now. Hi, Ms. Akanksha. It's great to meet you. Thank you for making the time for this tonight.
Thank you so much for having me.
Tell our audience and me a little bit about why you want to be the next Secretary General of the UN.
I believe in the UN. I believe in the purpose and mission it was created for. But the UN of today is not serving people the way it's supposed to serve. Let me give you a couple examples. We have the highest number of refugees and displaced people in the world today, 85 million. For every dollar the UN receives, only 29 cents goes for the cost. That's 29% of a 50 billion budget that's used for cause, and then rest is bureaucracy. And this is not something that the world can afford after COVID. So we do need a new UN, and we need it now. And what I bring to the table is that new and fresh perspective and a perspective of a woman who has never been given the chance to be a Secretary General, a perspective of a millennial. Half of the world is 30 and majority is 30 under 35, which is the legal definition for youth. And we've never been given a seat at the table when it comes to international organizations. I bring perspective of an employee. Employees are the ones who are so close to the problem and know exactly how best to solve it. And that's a perspective that could really take UN's implementation role to new heights.
So you've been working there, my understanding is around, and correct me if I'm wrong, 4 years. I've covered a number of conferences, 3 times inside the UN. And I remember thinking, even in the way that you had to log into your computer or the places that had internet access, how change has really not taken a hold of the organization. Like it doesn't seem like it's easy. So from your perspective, why do you think a change at the top will necessarily result in systemic change in the organization as a whole?
That's a great question. So when I joined the UN, I was thrilled to be part of this Castle on the Hill, which is such an exclusive club, and you're fortunate enough to be invited to work there. So I was invited to be part of the financial reforms team under the current Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, and I was hired for my financial expertise. So when I joined, I had no intentions to run for this top office, but my decision to run for the position is influenced based on what I learned. And what I've learned is that there are 2 UNs, and you can't really see it from the outside. It's like tip of an iceberg that you see, which is the decision-making bodies, the conferences, the General Assembly, the Security Council, the Economic and Social Commissions, the SDGs, those talking elements. There's a big UN, that's the implementation element headed by the Secretary General of the UN. And that is more than $50 billion budget of the UN. It has almost close to 100 entities. And that is where we need a leader like myself who can implement and can get things done. And the reason why your question was, how do I think I can implement change is, so for far too long, we've given a position of Secretary General to the same profile of people who's been in politics or international relations or diplomacy, and they have made the job to be serving politicians. But we need to now serve people. There are so many people suffering in refugee crisis who are now also climate refugees who don't have access to internet or education when it comes to their development needs. And those need to be the priority of the UN. And that is something I think a new leader and a fresh leader can bring into the UN. And I think a young leader, my generation, like the foundation of our generation is equality, inclusiveness. And I think having someone like me will open doors for the other people to be involved and make UN more inclusive to others. And that is why I think we can bring that change. And I think let me substantiate that in terms of like where my generation has made substantial difference. The first climate conference in the world ever was in 1972 under the auspices of UN. And then it took one Greta in 2018 to come and make that difference. So we've known all along, but it takes a young person to mobilize the world around a cause. And I think that's what my leadership will bring, is mobilize people around the UN and to make them think, wow, this is our world and we need a UN that works for all of us.
So skeptics will take a different view of your age, your experience, and say, hey, why does that, why do you think you can you can sort of come into a role like the top of the organization at your age. I think it's great that that people, that a woman my age and other, women our age are showing that kind of ambition. But I can imagine they will say, hey, you also need a lot of experience to occupy a role like that. And you also need countries to support you. And so far from what I've read, you don't have any country endorsing you yet. So tell us a little bit about what your response to that kind of criticism would be, or skepticism would be, and also if you think, for example, Canada might support you, or I know you've talked to Ambassador Bob Rae, so tell us a bit about that.
So I think the skeptics, I just want to say a few things. So when I was at the UN, I went to Africa for a mission trip in Uganda, and I saw a child eating mud. It was a devastating image for me to see a child eating mud, because I was living in a good hotel, being able to eat everything. And all I could do for that child at that time was to give her food and some cash. And there wasn't any adult around who could answer my questions on who's going to take care of her. But that image has always been stuck with me. So when I came to New York, I asked one of our senior officials with almost 25 years experience to say, this child is eating mud. What can we do about it? And he said, I quote, "Mud is good for children. It has iron." So what sometimes too much experience in one area does is it makes you lock down into the thinking of that organization. You cannot even think differently. Silence becomes an acceptable response. Inaction is okay. And I think status quo is not challenged. For someone as experienced as that person to say mud is good for children, it has iron, I think then we would say that experience is a liability, because it doesn't allow you to think differently, to do differently. And I think the gamble this election would be to have the same person with the same experiences as before and expect different results. We all know UN is not delivering on what it's capable of delivering. So we do need change. And that's what I bring to the table, is that fresh perspective. And in terms of experience, I do have, so prior to coming to the UN, I did have 7 years of experience where I proved myself to be a leader in my profession. I was one of the youngest professors teaching at U of T in audit. I was a manager at PricewaterhouseCoopers, and I was writing audit standards for Canada. So I have contributed and excelled in my profession, and I was hired for that. And in 4 years at the UN, I have been exposed to diplomacy and international relations and management. I have sat through all the decisions. I have written speeches for people. So I have seen the dynamics of decision making, and I understand the culture better than anyone, because I understand what it takes to take a decision and implement it. So I think I do bring experience that is relevant. It is different. I acknowledge that. Mm-hmm. And I think that's I think the test this election for member states is, are differences really shut down or honored? Just because someone is different than us, does it mean that we will not even give them a seat at the table to present their case? And that is the question. That was my nomination discussion with Canada, that my candidacy should not be just looked at as an individual. There's a lot of burden of proof on me. I understand that, but it should also be analyzed with burden of accountability for the incumbent.
And what
results
was Mr. Rae receptive?
It was a positive discussion. I was honored that they gave me the time to discuss. I'm still waiting to hear what Canada's position would be. But for me, this candidacy, my candidacy is inspired by Canadian values of equality, diversity, and progress. And being an immigrant to Canada, I've seen how Canada is so warm and welcoming and inclusive to all of us and transparent in our operations. And that's what I want to bring to the UN. So I am hopeful that Canadian government would consider that in their decision. And my candidacy represents three areas that have been marginalized women. For 75 years, we've never had a female Secretary General. And it's far too long that women have not been able to crack this glass ceiling. And this is an opportunity for us to show to the world that women empowerment is not just a word for us, it does translate to action. Youth, every leader has said youth inclusiveness is at the core of their policy. So I think it'd be great to see that in action as well. And my experience will always be different, because that's what youth bring to the table. We are not same, and I think that is something I would encourage my skeptics to open their hearts and minds to it, that difference is not a crime. It's not a bad thing, and that should be honored and respected.
Okay, I'm going to leave it there. Thank you so much, Ms. Akanksha. Great to meet you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.